Now, let's go back to the station fire. There is a controversial report. In fact, the LA County Board of Supervisors acted on that report today. And we have with us right now County Supervisor Mike Antonovich. He's in our newsroom right now to talk more about that. And welcome, first of all, Mr. Antonovich.
Well, thank you, Colleen.
I'm looking at this report, and one thing that sticks out in my mind is the section that says, what was not done about the station fire. Can you just give me an idea of what that is? If you could give us just a quick run-through of what the board was dealing with here.
Well, first let me say that Michael Friedman did a superb job as a fire chief for the county. I was on the Board of Supervisors when we recommended that Michael be hired 20 years ago, and he's done a superb job, and he will be lost, and he has a great legacy, and he's leaving a department in great shape. But Michael's done a superb job. Relative to the station fire, the report that our county fire department had done indicated that the U.S. Forestry Service could have done a better job had they utilized our air support in the evenings and early morning hours. The U.S. Forestry Service has a different philosophy relative to using air support relative to night flying and early morning. And had they done that, that fire would not have been 160,000 acres destroyed and the loss of life and property that had taken place from that tragedy. Secondly, we are also asking that there be brush clearance would be 200 feet instead of 30 feet. Currently, the county's regulations have a 200 feet brush clearance. However, federal policy is only a 30 feet brush clearance. And we feel that would also help mitigate some of the disasters that have occurred by these types of fires. And thirdly, we ought to be able to use mechanized equipment, such as our bulldozers and all, immediately when there is a need. And the U.S. Forestry Service has to have clearance in Washington, D.C., which is a delaying tactic to getting these types of tools available to protect property and life. So those types of recommendations, we are hopeful that the U.S. government will implement upon the recommendation of our fire department, Chief Michael Friedman, and also the unanimous support from the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors.
Well, Supervisor, we know that the bulk of this fire burned into the Angeles National Forest. But once it started taking out homes and taking out neighborhoods, and we understand, as you well know, that people lost their lives in this fire, was it a jurisdiction issue? Why didn't the county then take precedence and take over control of the fire?
Well, that's my position. I believe the federal government ought to allow the county fire department to take control of these types of fires when we're talking about this environment. Right now, we don't have that authority. It was the U.S. Forestry Service that had control, and the county was only a support group to that forestry department.
But Supervisor, this fire went on for weeks. In fact, I believe 6 weeks this fire burned. Why didn't the county step in? Why didn't somebody step in and take control at that point?
There was a lot of moaning and concern, and that's why we had this report after the fact, but we did not have the authority. The federal government had the authority. It was vested in the U.S. Forestry Service, and frankly, they were inept in doing what they had to be done, and that was to put out the fire. They let it burn. If you remember the Rancho Palos Verdes fire that occurred from an accident where a car went off the road and started this fire, we put in 2 super scoopers that put out that fire within minutes. We had super scoopers on the tarmac ready to go. We had air support on the tarmac ready to go, but they were not being called. And when they were called, they weren't being utilized early mornings, late night, which we usually do when we put out a fire in county jurisdiction.
Well, it was a good 3 or 4 days before the DC-10 came in, right, and before the super scoopers were called in. What does this mean for the people who lost their homes and the families who lost their loved ones?
The U.S. Forestry Service ought not to have the authority to control these types of fires. They ought to allow the county fire department to have complete control. Let the Forestry Service be a support, but not the general in charge, when we didn't have the type of general that we required, and the policies that the federal government has are not the same policies that the county has, who can do a better job to save life and to save property. And that's why the board was unanimous in our support today, supporting our fire department, and we want to see some changes in Washington. I have personally written Senators Feinstein and Boxer in our congressional delegation. We have talked in the past during that fire to Congressman Schiff and David Dreyer and Buck McKeon about these type of changes that need to be done. and we're hopeful that they'll be able to make the necessary regulation changes so we won't have this occurring in the future.
And Supervisor, one other quick question before we go. What can you say to residents here in L.A. County that will assure them that those recommendations don't fall on deaf ears?
We're encouraging everybody to write their congressional representative asking for these changes, because the changes are based upon saving property and life, which is so vital.
All right, Supervisor Mike Antonovich, thank you so much for coming in and discussing this with us today, and I'm sure we'll have you back at a later date to make sure that somebody is paying attention to these. Thank you again.
Thank you, Colleen.
All right.